Okay, in the last lecture, we have created the component that can list the students which are there in the backend. But the data that we have provided in the table are all dummy data. That means the data is not coming from the backend. So in this video, what we are going to do, we will be creating a Spring Boot backend along with the MySQL, and we will provide the endpoint, or we will create the endpoint in the Spring Boot that will be used by the front end, that is our React.js application. Okay, so let's create the first, our very first Spring Boot application. So for that, I'll be moving to the IntelliJ IDEA. There I'll be going to click on the file and going to create the new project. Then I'll be selecting the Spring initializer, okay, which I guess that you might have added as a plugin. Then this is going to be there over here in the new project. If it is, if you have not added this plugin, then guys, please add it, and that you can do like this, that you can go to the file, then you can go to the settings, okay, and there you are going to have the option of plugins, and there you can look for the Spring initializer, okay, and assistant. You can select that and you can click on OK, so automatically that would be installed. Okay, so as it is already installed in my application, I'm not going to install it once again. So let me create the application, that is file, new project, the Spring application, and here I'm going to give the name, that is student backend, back end. Okay, and just clicking on the next. Make sure that you have the appropriate JDK version. Okay, click on the next. Okay, I forgot to specify this version 11 over here, that I have installed the JDK 11. That's why it is not, JDK 17 is not going to be supported on my machine. So I'm clicking on next, and here I have to select the dependencies. Like the first dependency would be the web dependency, the Spring Web, and another would be, that is the dependency which is related to SQL, okay, that is the JPA dependency. So if you are not able to find it or locate it somewhere here, what you can do, you can go to the search and type JPA, okay, so that JPA dependency would be there. Okay, and the last dependency that we require is the MySQL. MySQL drive. Okay, these three dependencies are important. Okay, and it will create my first Spring Boot project. Okay, so guys, let me explain that why do we require these dependencies. So what I'll be doing, I'm moving to the structure of this or project directory of the Spring Boot project. Okay, there I'm having a file called pom.xml. This is my Maven file. Okay, and here that I have provided, I have specified that few of the dependency I require. So the first one is the data JPA. This particular dependency is used to interact with the database which we are going to use with the Spring Boot application. And another dependency, that is the database specific dependency, that is the MySQL connector dash Java. Okay, so this dependency, the JPA dependency, will provide the support of the database connectivity and all, right, or the database related performance, whereas this MySQL connector dash Java will provide a support which is specific to the database. Okay, so that's why we have these two dependency, and along with that we have this dependency, that is a web dependency also. So this web dependency is used to provide the web related support to the Spring Boot application. Okay, so let's create our first endpoint over here in the Spring Boot application. So guys, this is a Spring Boot application. The Spring Boot application, that the codes would be in the Java, okay, and it would have some specific structure. Like here, when you will create the Spring Boot application, you will be having a structure like this, that you will be having a source folder. Inside the source folder you will be having a main, and inside main you will be having a Java and resource. In the Java folder you will able to create a class which are required to execute the project or to create a project, and in the resources you can have some static component like the files or images, okay, some templates, and one important thing, that is the applications dot properties. Okay, so in the application dot property file you can specify the application related properties. Okay, we will be using this application dot properties later on. Okay, now the next thing is, let's create the first endpoint. So in the Spring Boot, to create an endpoint we must have to create a controller. Okay, so what is a controller? Controller is like the entity which serves the client request. Okay, so here you can see this is the Spring MVC architecture. So what happens, that whenever there would be a request from the front end, at that time, there is a spatial sublet or spatial entity called the dispatcher sublet. What this dispatcher sublet does, it pass the information to the mapping handler. Okay, and this mapping handler would choose the appropriate controller that will serve the client request. Okay, and along with that there would be a handler adapter. Okay, and sometimes it happens that the controller specify the specific view name. Okay, at that time this handler adapter would be useful. Okay, and this controller can interact with the service, and the service could indirectly or in terms that interact with the repository, and repository will talk to the database. So guys, this was how that actual picture works in the Spring Boot application. Okay, so the controller can also prepare the model, and that model can also be transferred to the view. Okay, so in the our case the view is the React.js. Okay, so this is all about this MVC processing sequence of the Spring Boot. Now let's go back to our application. So in the application we will be creating a controller. Okay, so how can I create a controller? I will just do right click over here, clicking on new Java class. Okay, and then I'll be writing a controller. Let's say that the controller is name is my controller. Okay, hitting enter. Okay, and here let me just increase the font size, just a minute. Okay, so I have done some changes in the ID setting. So here you can see that we have created a class called my controller, and this class is going to work as a controller. Okay, so how can I make it controller? So for that I have to add the annotation called REST controller. So now whenever there would be any request from the front end, okay, at that time it is going to hit this particular class. Okay, in this class let's have something. So here what we are going to have, that we are going to have an endpoint, and that endpoint could be get or some other mapping. Okay, so let's say that as we want to get the student information, so I will be using a get mapping. Otherwise there would be a different types of mapping based on the client request. So let's first implement the get mapping. In the get mapping, that the URL could be like this, that slash students. Okay, so what will happen, that the front end will initiate the request like this, that http colon double slash local host colon, let's assume that our Spring Boot application is running on the port number 8080. Okay, and students. Okay, so whenever this kind of request would be generated from the front end, at that time it is going to hit this particular mapping. Okay, so now what to be done once it is going to hit over here? So there would be a function like this, that let's say public and string, public string, rather than having a return type string, let's return the student object. So here I'm writing student list. Okay, as I haven't created any student class, that's why it is showing me the error. Okay, so here the method name would be get list of students. Okay, we don't require any argument over here, so just I'm specifying the empty parentheses, and here I will be fetching the list of students from the database. Okay, so how can I do that? So to get the information from the database, what we require to do, we have to create a repository first. Okay, so let's create the Spring Boot repository like this, that new Java class, and I'm mentioning the repository. As I'm going to create this repository in the repositories folder, that's why I'm mentioning like this, that repository dot student repository. Okay, and this would be interface, not a class. Okay, so I'm hitting enter, and here you can see that the repository is created. Okay, now with this interface I must have to specify like this, that extends jpa repository. Okay, and there I'm going to mention for which particular object I want to create a repository. So this basically what will happen in the backend, there would be a table called student. Okay, and that student table would be having a different records. Okay, so that is what I'm mentioning over here, that the backend student table would be matched to the front end the Spring Boot class called student. That is what I'm mentioning over here. Okay, and the second argument would be the type of primary key. Let's say that it would be number, so I'm specifying integer. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm done. I don't require to write anything else over here. I forgot to do one more thing, that I have to put this class into the I should put this controller class into the package called controller. Then uh, no, it is going to work, but for the convention purpose, I should put it into the package. Okay, so let me create a new package and shift that class, my controller, into the package. Okay, so I'm going to create a package that is controllers. Okay, and let me shift this over here. Perfect. Okay, now that the only thing which is required is that I require to create the student class. Okay, so let's create the student class, and the student class will be the entity in the Spring Boot application. So whichever backend database table that you require, for that you have to create the entity in the Spring Boot application. So let's create the entity. This entity would be Java class. So here let me put into the models package, and the entity name is student itself. Okay, perfect. So here you can see this is the entity. So I must have to mark it with the annotation called entity. Okay, right, now this would work as a database table, or not, it would work as a database table, but it would be bound to the database table as we have mentioned in the student repository over here, this one. Okay, so let's complete this class. So it shows the error that as it is entity, I must have to have a primary key. So I'm adding this primary key, that is id, over here, right? And the id generation that I'm keeping, I'm not going to specify anything. Okay, let me click on OK. Right, so here you can see that the ID has been generated, and basically this entity class is the Pojo class. Okay, what is the Pojo class? Pojo stands for plain old Java object that would be having variables and along with that variable you will be having associated getter and the setter method, right? So that is a pojo class. Okay, along with that, let's have certain few other fields, like let's have a private, as we have mentioned this in the repository integer, I must have to have this id integer. Okay, otherwise it will give me the error. Okay, now we have taken the id. Now I'm going to take one more, that is field, that is the student name. So it would be type of string, so I'm writing student name, and another would be, let's say, private string address. Okay, here I'm changing this long to integer, as we have changed the field over here, and this also, this would be integer. Perfect. Okay, now we must have to create the setter and getter method for the name and address as well. So what I'll be doing, I'm going to take the help of this IDE, just doing a right click in the code window, clicking on generate and clicking on getter and setter. Okay, I'm selecting both of the field. Perfect. Okay, so my class is ready. Okay, and now let me import that class into student repository. So just hovering the mouse on the student and getting the option to import a class. Yeah, perfect, the class is imported, and in the my controller also, that just will over the mouse and will able to import it. Okay, and also I require to import the package for the list, which is the java.util. Perfect. Okay, so guys, here you can see that we have created like a controller. This controller will take the help of the student repository to get the data from the backend. Okay, and the whatever data would come from the backend, that would go to the class called student.java. That is what we have done. Okay, now the next thing that we are going to do is that we are going to call, or we are going to use the student repository, so that we will able to get a list of student from the database. Okay, so for that, what we have to do, we need a to have the object of student repository, and by default the Spring Boot is going to create the object of the student repository, and that's why to do this I'm going to use the annotation called auto-var, and going to tell to the Spring Boot that create the object of student repository. Okay, and get me the reference of it. Okay, this is known as the dependency injection. Okay, it is known as dependency injection. This is the one of the feature of the Spring Boot application. So that student repository object would be available. Okay, the reference is there. I can take that reference, okay, and return the list of student like this, that return student repository dot find all. Okay, so obviously you must be confused that what is happening over here. So guys, I'm calling a find all method of the student repository. See, the student repository would have certain methods that will uh, execute the SQL or the SQL in the backend. Like here, what will happen over here, this find all will execute the query like student select star from student, like this. Okay, select star from student in the backend. Okay, and it will return the rows from the database, and those rows would be bound to the student class which we have created over here. Okay, I hope this is clear to all of you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now what I can do, that I can run the application and I can test whether it is working or not. Okay, so here what I'll be doing, that I will be moving to the application.properties, and I have to specify certain properties related to the MySQL database. So the properties are like this: that spring dot data source dot URL. This is the first property that I have to specify. So the URL would be jdbc colon mysql colon double slash localhost. Localhost. Why localhost? Because that the database installed on my computer itself. That's why. And the port number would be 3306 followed by the database name. Let's say the database name is student. Okay, the database must be there in the backend, otherwise this application will throw the error. Okay, the next thing that we have to specify is spring dot data source dot username. Okay, the username is root, and another one, that is spring dot data source dot password is equal to abcd at 1234. These are the information which are specific to my machine. Okay guys, for your machine you may be having a different username and password. Okay, so please take care of that. Another property that I'm going to specify is the spring dot jpa dot hibernate dot ddl auto, that is equal to update. Okay, so what will happen, that whenever there would be any change in the schema, okay, that would be updated to the backend, right? And also I'm going to write one more property, that is spring dot jpa dot hibernate dot show spring dot hibernate dot show SQL is equal to true. This is a property that will display the query which is going to be executed by the backend. Okay, so we are done with the properties. Okay, now let me start the application. I'm starting the application. Application started successfully. Let me check my backend. Do I have the table called student or not? I think that I would be having the table. That's why it hasn't shown any error. So that my MySQL Workbench is ready, and let me open it. Let me go to the, yeah, it is there, database is there. Okay, and here you can see that by default the table is created, but if you will try to fetch the rows from the table, yeah, few informations are also there. Okay, so this is good for me, that the data, some data are already there. If it is not there, then what you can do, you can add your own data also, like 333, then address, let's say Ahmedabad. Okay, and the name, let's say Chirag. Okay, right, you can close this, save the changes, and it would be added to the, what has happened, yeah, it is here, that student. Okay, this one. Okay, 333 Ahmedabad Chira. Okay, let's go back. Let's try to test our application. So to test the application, what I'll be doing, I'll go to the VS Code. There I'm having the plugin called Thunder Client, and there I'm going to create a new request. Okay, the request would be get. Okay, as we have specified the get mapping over here, this one, get mapping, and that is the students. Okay, so that is what I'm going to write, that is http colon double slash local host. Guys, the Spring Boot application runs on a different port, that is a port number 8080, and you can check it from the this terminal. Okay, let me show you. Here you can see that your Tomcat server on for this of the Spring Boot application is started on the port number 8080. Okay, so let me click on the sorry, and let me complete the URL first. So the URL would be students, and let me click on a send. So it should display the list of students, and that is what I'm getting. Okay, so guys, here in this video we have created our first endpoint called the student. Okay, right, and that is with the help of http method get. Okay, that's it for this video.